Hey, what's up YouTube? What's going on? In today's new video, what I wanted to do is I wanted to have a discussion around seated exercises. And the reason I wanted to have this discussion is because when it comes to seated exercises, a lot of people tend to put themselves in positions that they may be putting their low back at a risk for injury, especially if they've been sitting for a prolonged period of time throughout the day, and then they go into the gym and do more seated exercises where now they're significantly loading their lumbar spine. So the thing with seated exercises, and the major problem that I have, is that we live in a society today where we have a lot of people that are working at desk jobs or they're working at offices and they're being in a position of being seated for upwards to 8 hours or even longer sometimes, depending on maybe if they're working overtime or whatever the case may be. And then when you take that same person and now you put them into a gym situation where they are now doing more seated exercises. Maybe it's a seated shoulder press, maybe it's a seated leg extension, maybe it's a seated chest press, whatever the case may be. The point that I'm trying to kind of get across here is that when you take that individual, they've been stressing their whole low back for 8 hours or more, and being in a static position of sitting for that period of time is not exactly normal and healthy for a lumbar spine. And now when we go into the gym and we start loading up our spine in a seated position, we're just adding to the stress to the lumbar spine after we've stressed it all day. So what ends up happening is that you often see is that if this is continuously repeated over time for continuous cycles, it's only a matter of time until one may get injured when they go into the gym. And if they do the wrong thing, maybe they just bend over the wrong way or whatnot, and that's how an injury may be induced or an injury may occur, specifically a bulging disc or herniated disc. Because the thing with sitting itself is that it's a direct stressor of our spinal discs. And to understand this concept a little bit better, if we were to take a tree, for example, and we have a tree branch off to the side here, if we were to hang a weight from the tree branch and we just let that weight hang for 24 or 48 hours, what would end up happening is that that tree branch would continuously be pulled down by the weight. And now this isn't a heavy weight, but just enough weight that's going to continuously pull it down. What will end up happening is that the tree branch will continue to deform. Now, if it gets to a certain point where it's completely deformed, and now if we remove that weight, that tree branch will not be able to recoil back to its normal position because it's been significantly deformed from the continuous pulling down of the weight. So a similar concept is occurring when we are sitting for a long period of time. We have a creep effect occurring on our lumbar spine. And so when we have that sustained loading on our lumbar spine, and then we go do the wrong exercises in the gym, or we do more seated exercises, we're just going to beat up on our lower back. And as we continue to do this over time, that's how a lower back problem, such as a disc issue, may arise or may occur. So that is my kind of big issue with seated exercises. Now, that's not to say don't do seated exercises. It really depends on the context, because in some cases, seated exercises would be advisable, specifically in the case where someone may have some limitations or restrictions, maybe have a broken leg, maybe they have a sprained ankle where they can't stand, and seated positions are the only thing that they can do and maybe work out in those positions. So there's where I could see the rationale for seated exercises in that case. But we have to also understand too, and look to things from an athletic performance point of view. Is being in a seated position practical, or is it functional, or is there any carryover to really an athletic scenario? Because the thing is, if you look to the 5 major sports, you look at hockey, basketball, baseball, football, and soccer, being the 5 major sports in North America, they don't perform their sport in a seated position. So why train in a seated position to begin with? You can't train athletic performance for those sports in a seated position. So for me, the rationale is just not there to be performing seated exercises for these individuals in terms of an athletic performance point of view. Sure, maybe in a rehab scenario, there may be rationale there, which I understand. And the whole point being is that the context matters in the situation. But like I mentioned, we have the stress on our lumbar spinal disc as a result of sitting. The athletic performance carryover, it's just not there for sports, specifically the 5 major ones like I mentioned. And so going to perform seated exercises for me, it's just not really part of my philosophy because I feel like the risk is too high. Now, let's keep in mind too, though, it really depends on the individual too and what they're doing. Because if maybe an individual is not sitting at a desk all day for 8 hours and maybe they actually engage in good spine sparing activities throughout the day, then doing some seated exercises here and there would be more than probably fine for them. And that's kind of a situation that may be fine, or in terms of the context that may be okay. But looking at other things from seated exercises as well, one other thing too to keep in mind is that when it comes to seated exercises, we can also load up more when it comes to seated exercises, because now we've taken our lower body out of the equation for the most part. And so when it comes to doing maybe a shoulder press or some other activity, we can significantly load our lower back up more because we have less kind of stabilization activities or requirements involved. And so by loading up more means there's going to be more load placed on the lumbar spine and more stress. And so I can see in some cases, maybe in a bodybuilding scenario where that may be practical, where one's maybe trying to put on more muscle, but in terms of the long-term kind of injury prevention, probably wouldn't be the best for that type of individual. But it all comes down to the context and what one is looking to achieve or trying to achieve for that matter, and what is the risk-reward ratio. But anyways, for someone with existing low back issues, disc issues, seated exercises probably for the most part would not be the best for them, and I would not advise them, specifically if they're symptomatic, because if they're only going into a position where they're going to trigger their symptoms, that is just not ideal for that individual. And if they keep doing that, then they're only going to stay in pain and make things worse. But even for someone with an asymptomatic disc issue, it still wouldn't be practical for them because they're stressing their spinal discs, and continuously doing that over time, that could make that asymptomatic disc symptomatic. So just wanted to share that with you guys with regards to having a discussion around seated exercises. Personally, I'm not the biggest fan. Sure, there's some that may be okay, and everyone is different, but when you're going from a position where you're sitting all day to another position where now you're loading up your lumbar spine as a result of maybe doing a shoulder press seated, probably not the best thing to be doing. So just wanted to share that with you guys. Hopefully this helps you, and hopefully maybe you can kind of take some information from this and apply it to yourself in terms of maybe preventing a future problem from arising and also improving your athletic performance as well. So with that being said, guys, I wish you guys all the best and a successful and productive day. Take care.